I have a secret. But I'm just no good at keeping secrets. I can't do it. So I'm going to tell you my little secret. But don't let it out. You can't let it out. I mean, don't worry. If you do, the people who are going to be really angry at me and hate me, well, they're the ones who probably should. Okay. This is it. Slavery was never an American institution. Oh. No, that's right. Slavery was never an American institution. That's the big secret. You look like you want an explanation. Well, okay. That's fair. That's fair. I am teaching you against indoctrination. So allow me to explain. First, a timeline. Okay? 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed across the vast blue in search of a shorter route to the India spice trades. He accidentally stumbled upon this big new world, not America. He sails right back across the vast blue and goes and tells all of his European friends, "Hey everybody, I found this big new world." He did not say, "I found America." Well, it was like a mass exodus. Italians, French, Spanish, British, German, Portuguese, and a dozen other European countries all sailed right back across this big, vast ocean to discover the New World. Not America. Well, they realized a few things pretty quickly when they did. First of all, pioneering this big new world, not America, was pretty difficult. They needed labor. But what they also discovered was that there was this really convenient industry over in Africa that had been going on for centuries called slavery. In fact, it's kind of interesting. The very first recorded slaves that ever came to the New World, not America, were driven by the whip crack of their Dutch masters. It was the Dutch. Now that was way back in the year 1619. Well, once that happened, everybody else started looking at how easy pioneering was for the Dutch, and they said, well, I'm going to jump on the slavery bandwagon too. So that's exactly what they did. I got a couple of facts here. Let me read them to you. In 1640, the first legal sanctioning occurred within the mainland of the New World, furthering the slave trade by multiple ethnicities and nationalities, all European. So what actually happened was they went to the courts and legalized slavery in the New World, not America. Not too long after that, in 1662, 114 years before the Americanization of the New World, that is to say, before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and we'll come to that, a colonial court ruled that children born into servitude would then become slaves themselves. Oh, the inhumanity of us Americans! Oh, wait a minute. That was 114 years before. That's right. In fact, throughout the early 1700s, there were multiple court rulings that affected several facets of slavery, ultimately indoctrinating slavery as a New World issue. So, slavery had become so indoctrinated into the culture and the society of the New World, not America, that everybody owned slaves. White people owned slaves. Europeans owned slaves. There were black slave owners. In fact, people you wouldn't even expect owned slaves. The American Indians owned slaves. The Jews owned slaves. The Jews were the worst slave masters of them all. Well, except for the Arab Muslims and the black African tribesmen over in Central and North Africa who in the 14th to 15th century had 1.5 million galley slaves and sex slaves. But, that doesn't really count because that was way over in Africa, and besides, all those slaves were white. Needless to say, here in the New World, not America, everybody owned slaves. That's how indoctrinated slavery was in the culture of the New World, not America. Because in 1776, a very funny thing happened. And it started when a bunch of ragtag little colonial farmers got together and they signed this little bitty piece of paper called the Declaration of Independence. And voila, it was the birth of America. It was no longer the New World. And it wasn't much longer after that the first colonial Congress got together and spent many years, I think 10 or 12 years, drafting this other little bitty piece of paper before they perfected it, called the U.S. Constitution. That was in 1787. And what a novel idea that was. Liberty and freedom for everyone? That's never been tried before. It's sure to fail, but by God, it's worth a go. So, we gave it a shot. Immediately, there was one problem to the U.S. Constitution, though, and that was, indeed, slavery. So, in 1806, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States of America, got together with the Continental Congress and passed what was called the Slave Trade Act of 1807, abolishing the international slave trade and making the international slave trade illegal and unconstitutional, not to mention unethical and immoral. So, what spent almost 2 centuries indoctrinating itself into the culture of the New World didn't last 20 years against the U.S. Constitution before the international slave trade was made illegal. But there was one small problem. Enter the Democrats. Dun, 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 dun. The party that's going to save the people. Unless, of course, they rule every aspect of your life and force you to do their bidding to further their agenda. Like slaves. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, that's the second part of this episode when our timeline goes through the 20th century and into the 2000s. I digress. So needless to say, all of those people that own plantations and all of those agriculturalists and all of those rich Southern socialites with their fingers in politics, you know, those good Southern Democrats, they were the people that owned slaves. Now, they did not want to lose their slaves. My God, they'd have to pay for labor or do it themselves. So they held on to their slaves with an iron grip, continuing to be unconstitutional, and that is to say un-American, for decades, until about 1852, when something else very interesting happened. You see, this political party split away from the Whigs up in the North and developed a platform of humanity based on the idea that all men should be free. Enter the Republicans. Yeah. And in 1860, they put a man in the White House by the name of Abraham Lincoln, who was not only the first Republican president of the United States, he was the first Republican president of the whole freaking world. So now there is a president determined to free the slaves. So what do you think the slave states of the South did immediately after he became the president? Well, they all seceded. They formed their own nation. They didn't want to have anything to do with the United States. They didn't want to have anything to do with Abraham Lincoln, and they sure as hell didn't want to have anything to do with freed slaves. So they became the Confederacy. That was the name of their nation. Now, President Lincoln could have very easily said, fine, y'all stay down there and we'll stay up here. But remember, the entire reason he ran for the presidency was to abolish slavery, was to free all people. And he was so determined to do it that he was willing to sacrifice 600,000 white men to the cause and rip this country in half. Make no mistake, the Civil War was about one thing. It wasn't about agriculture or industry or economics. It didn't pitch black people versus white people. It didn't even pitch the North versus the South or American versus American. It was a war of ideology, plain, period, and simple, that pitched the constitutional, anti-slavery Republican Americans against the unconstitutional, pro-slavery Democrat Confederacy. That was what the Civil War was all about. You see, the idea of what an American is much bigger than simply being American. It's easy to be American, but if you want to stand for what America represents, that takes character. It takes discipline, responsibility, integrity. So you tell me, was slavery ever an American institution, really? Well, I think that if you're the kind of American that applies a code of ethics and morality to your behavior, who respects the law and the Constitution, then yeah, you probably believe that slavery was never and will never be an American institution. But if you're the kind of person that believes being American simply gives you the right to be unethical and immoral and unlawful and unconstitutional, like our Southern Democrats did who believed in slavery, then yeah, I think that you're probably the kind of person that believes that slavery was an American institution. So here's the real question. What kind of an American do you choose to be? Ask yourself that question. That's what I would suggest. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a layman, like you. Peace out.